The state of Oregon has millions of acres of dry forest. These forests are dependent on regular recurring fire. They were mild fires in the past that would cleanse the forest, reduce the fuels, the sticks on the forest floor, and help sustain a thriving, vigorous forest of large, old trees. In the absence of fire for decades, our forests are burning at uncharacteristically severe levels.
Wildfire is a threat to the community, both in threatening homes, private property, and infrastructure, and also threatening the city's watershed and the beautiful backdrop to a tourist-based economy.
The Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest forms the backdrop for Ashland, not just for the private landowners who live within the watershed, but for the people who recreate and play here. On average, this watershed sees about 50,000 users a year. It's a heavily loved and played in area. We have people who travel from around the world to come here.
The project is definitely a collaborative project with the Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, Lomakotsi, NRCS, and the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, is the conduit for lottery funds to help our community in vital ways.
So Ashland has become a demonstration project with partners coming together to address this problem, to reduce fuels, to thin the forest, and to begin to return mild fire that helps us sustain the values that we care about.
Our role in the project is to lead a lot of the implementation of the forest restoration, the treatments on the ground. This is an all-lands initiative. Fire knows no boundaries. First thing we do is bring our crews in. We work closely with the landowner, with our other partners. We flag out the boundaries. We come up with a prescription on what trees to keep, what trees to remove, what trees to take, how we're going to implement our restoration treatment. So then the crews will come in and they will mark the trees that we want to retain. They'll mark some areas that need to be protected for wildlife. They'll mark some other areas that we need to maybe thin a little heavier. And then following that, a saw team will come in of folks with chainsaws, so they don't have to make those really difficult decisions on what species to leave and what species to keep. Typically we're cutting small material, below 10 inches in diameter in a lot of cases, so relatively small trees and shrubs, to reduce the ladder fuels. If a fire were to come in, the ladder fuels carry the fire up into the crowns of the trees. So we're trying to interrupt that fire behavior by reducing the understory, but still retaining the understory. So after the thinning is done and the cutting, generated activity material, the biomass will be piled into small hand piles, so it dries out and it's not green. And then the following year, burn crews will come in with drip torches and they will ignite those piles and burn that material. And then in some cases following that, we will seed into the burn piles with native grasses to try to encourage the understory to come back. Because the forest has been so shaded, a lot of our understory plants have gone away. So trying to create a dapple light environment with multiple species in a mosaic pattern that replicates how the land would look if fire were allowed to burn here in a regular cycle. The forest will be more open conditions with the way we're doing our treatments. There'll be groupings of trees clustered together. In other areas, there'll be single larger trees, and that's a big emphasis to protect the large old trees. We call those ecological anchors when we do our treatments. So our crews are thinking that way. So we'll key in on those bigger trees first, or those less represented species like black oak or madrone. We'll thin the smaller trees around them in a circumference. That'll create a spatial pattern across the landscape where the fire hazard is reduced, but the integrity and structure of the forest is retained.
One of the unexpected positive byproducts of the work being done in the Ashland Forest Resiliency Project was that the Ashland Trails Project, which sought to actually create user-specific trails for hikers and bikers and equestrians and to deal with user conflicts that were happening, actually helped to reduce those user conflicts. It helped open up the forest floor so that people could see each other coming. It made building trails easier. So there was a real symbiotic relationship between the two projects.
Oh, in order to build community support, it really helps to have landowners who experience these kind of ecosystems and these values to also be members of the community. Very important. Virtually anything in nature crosses boundaries. So they've come to realize, these owners and all landowners out here that are concerned, that they have to think in a watershed context. And as important as water is in the West, wow, pretty important that we have that intellectual understanding. So we're looking at one organism in an ecosystem, a ponderosa pine tree. This individual tree has been used to fire for hundreds of years, thousands of years, but none had been happening here for the last probably 100 years. So as foresters, as professionals, we're trying pretty hard to achieve the landowner objectives, and their objectives was to save our trees while doing this ecosystem level process of underburning.
Through our organization, we have a tribal ecosystem restoration partnership program that is managed by tribal members that are employees of Lomacotsi. The tribal councils that we work with support these members, providing lodging, and we employ members on this project about 6 to 8 months a year. And then they return to their homelands and they bring that skill set back. On the project alone, we've had over 200 people employed seasonally, 15 to 20 full-time equivalent on the project. Mobilization of for-profit businesses in the forestry sector. So working with the timber industry, timber community, the service forestry community, and then in-house at Lomacotsi, we employ over 60 folks on the ground on this project. So also supporting other businesses that have been in the forestry sector for years and have been impacted by a shift in the economics from the boom and bust of large tree logging to a more restoration forestry approach, where we still are removing logs. We still are supplying mills with materials. It's a restoration approach where those are the byproducts of restoration, not the driver. The incubation of local restoration contract businesses has been a huge part of the project. The Latinx community, Latino community, is a huge contributor to the boots on the ground, the technical expertise, and the restoration efforts on this project. So it's a multicultural workforce. That diversity, working to restore biodiversity, is a very wholesome project and a wholesome model that could be looked at nationally.